All right, it's a hot one here in Peru, and I'm sitting in the backyard and waited till later because I had forgotten that this morning I went in for 2 hours of getting some titanium things in my jaw for what they call tooth implants. It's all a process of getting old, I guess. Um, Fabulous technology. Made me think of Unwind a bit while I was undergoing the process. But at any rate, so the Novocaine is all worn off, and so the painkiller helps. And so I thought I'd sit down and talk with you about this week's quiz over our novel um, Unwind, which I'm glad to see that many of you like a lot. And I've started to read um, Unholy, and you'll run up into some of the same characters: Hayden, uh, Lev, Risa, and of course Connor, with some new people and a little bit different perspective on a few of the things. I'm sorry the air conditioner just went on, just what I didn't need for the moment, but that's okay. Um, okay, 30 questions as a rule, as you found on pretty much all the quizzes. If you've read the material, this one should be pretty simple for you. Um, and, now unwinding is that, go over some terminology here because this book has some great neologisms and whatnot, or old words put to new use to give you an idea of how expansive and important this industry has become. And at one point, the admiral, I does say, is that if people had donated organs, then this whole thing wouldn't have been such a big deal. But um, as a part of the unwinding of the war, the end of the war, the decisions were made, and a Nobel Prize winner got the Nobel Prize for inventing a new kind of procedure that allowed for all manner of implants. So everything came together at one time. Um, and so uh, the industry grew, and it is an industry, and it's a high-paying industry, and one of the indicators of it, all the different vocabulary and all the different facets of law enforcement and things like that are involved, and competitive harvest homes and selling, to the best parts to the richest people, as usual. These kinds of things happen, and so I mean, someone said, I'm sure, probably on the discussion thread, that who would allow their child to be aborted, retroactive abortion? And I was telling someone today that, this book reflects a lot of what's going on today with the pro-life and pro-choice and basically the names of the armies that fought. And as Risa says, and it's confirmed that both sides really lost this war when things gotten out of hand. But I was today thinking, they're not taking sides or anything. Our book doesn't, by the way. Which side were you on? And the admiral says I was on the military side, but he helped format the whole program, the treaty, and all the different things that come from it. But if you think about it, 13-year-olds to 18-year-olds. By the end of our book, it's 17-year-olds. When the young lady, the woman, uh, did the filibuster at the Texas State House to try to stop this, one of the many new abortion laws that are coming through in all states, especially in the South, but in Wisconsin here, um, that Rick Perry said that this woman should know better. She should know better because she came from a single mother, and that she had the chance to do well, and that all babies deserve to have a chance. So at the end of it, abortion is prohibited, but everybody has a chance. So from 13 to 18, um, there's something called retroactive abortion, which says that if society or the parents deem that a child is too troubled and it'll be a burden on society or anything like that, then the child is or becomes into a divided state and then is making a contribution to society. And the propaganda and the buildup, by the time the second book comes along, there's competitions among the harvest homes because there aren't enough people. And they're talking about something like 2,000 or 3,000 people a year. So it's not like every family types, which is a religious angle on it, because the typing is 1/10 is what it means. And so Connor's, not Lev's family types, and you make a promise to God when the child is born. And so you have the religious angle here. You have all kinds of other angles that is not completely out to lunch, given the kind of state that goes on here. The book like this sort of casts light back on what's going on in society today without making any determinations about, what's right or wrong, except if you were a teenager, most likely, and you were told that you're going to be unwound, then, well, the reality is that you'd be really upset. And so unwinding becomes a law of the land, and it's the licensed facilities supported by taxes, and they make a profit. Unwinding is the process by which the individual is dismantled, and by law, and that's the one, 99.44% of a human must be used and kept alive in transplant. So they have banks all over the place, organ banks where things are kept alive, and this new concept allows you to just go in and, get a new pair of lips if you want it. And this accord came after what was called the American Second Civil War, and it was called the Heartland War. And I'm not positive how many years it lasted, but we do know our story takes part in the not distant future, but at a time when, as we said, iPods. I think we were talking. I was talking to my wife, and then on the video, I always say we when I'm talking to you. It's a kind of a conversation. It's one-sided, but I enjoy it. That the iPod is something of an antique. Now, given the rapid rate, and I can't remember that law about how much technology advances each year by what percent, but how long will it be until an iPod is sort of like a 4-track player that many of you may have remember or know of. And that was when I was your age. That was a hot thing. In your own car to have the music like that. Well, now they're antiques. So how long has it taken? Not that long. Now, there's another thing that goes along with this whole system, and it's called the Unwind Accord. And that's what I was talking about. The Unwind Accord was that parents can unwind, in their estimation, troubled teens through something called retroactive abortion. In this case, it's with a purpose. And of course, there's the idea of how does that solve the problem of unwed mothers who are forced to have children when no abortion is available? And, and it's like the Admiral said when he's talking to Connor, I believe, or maybe Risa, is that, he was living at a time when the pro-life people were doing things like shooting any doctor who performed an abortion. But on the other hand, the pro-choice people, the other extreme of that one was that people were having babies and selling them for stem to get the money for stem research. So, a pox on both your houses. But still, children, young ladies, as the one in your book, they have babies with no father. And there's a way out of the system, and it's called storking. And that means that when a mother does not wish to keep her newborn baby, she has the legal option to leave the baby on someone else's doorstep. And legally, you're supposed to raise that child as your own. As you can imagine, a high percentage of unwound children happen to be probably people storked, less of a emotional hold on them. And as Connor, remembers that a baby appeared on his parents' doorstep, and they took it in and waited till the next night and put it on another one, and then the baby ends up on theirs sick, and I guess the child died. Everybody was like, I don't want this baby, so they were restorking, if you will. And so when he sees the boy at the door where the young girl has put a baby and says, oh my gosh, not again, he can't help himself, and he on impulse goes and rescues the child, and putting, of course, himself, Lev, and Risa into some jeopardy. But that's the part of what's going on here, is that nothing is really solved. Now, the other kind of thing you say is what we have in these kinds of things, a harvest home, talk about your reaping. And you have these other kind of things, what I mentioned as euphemisms to hide what's really going on. And so instead of saying we're killing you and taking your part, the official lingo is that people live on, basically, for however long, in a divided state. And that's the belief that the unwound are not considered to be dead. They're just in a different state, a divided state, and that has both legal implications, religious implications, all this, but it is a euphemistic turn of phrase, so that you make something that's pretty dreadful sound, nice. Happy Jack's Harvest Camp. And it looks beautiful, and people go there. And these harvest camps, what are they really designed? They're designed to provide a positive experience for youth designated for unwinding. And the usual stay is 3 weeks or so, and you have lots of soccer games, but what we're really doing is checking out everybody to see who has the best legs for the purposes of exercise and all these things, so that they can attach a higher market value to the human body. And this is what I was talking about, the commodification of the human body in this one, where the body becomes a commodity, a leg of bill, or whatever, if someone wants something, and you go on the market, and so a human being becomes a product. Now, this is in many ways, or an item, and women, of course, in the depictions of women, that's been going on for a long time. Is that in many places the woman is considered basically an object, and this is the idea. It's one of the stories in non-Western literature about Egypt, contemporary Egypt, and the guy is looking for a really young girl to make him look virile, and he goes in and he sizes her beauty. He weighs her beauty, it says, to determine the dowry. And there's another example of this, but in this case, you have an industry. You have an industry centered around the use of young children as a kind of a marketplace for body parts, and you put a price tag on it. And this is what actually goes on at Happy Jack's Harvest Camp. That word harvest, when we talk about harvesting organs, and that's, by the way, in today's lingo, if you make it sound nice, then it hides its true nature. And like the slang term for the clinic within a harvest camp where the unwinding occurs is the chop shop. Now that refers, by the way, to places where if someone steals the car and they take it to the chop shop, and they basically just turn that car into pieces overnight to sell on the computer market and things like that, very much the way the Admiral sells things at the graveyard, mostly on computer. The last thing he wants is a bunch of people hanging around the graveyard and finding the 200 or 435 or how many it is at any one time unwinds he has on the premises. And so the children, who are actually the ones that are being done in, they call it the chop shop. The extent to which it's this whole business, if you will, corporation of harvesting informs the society is found in words like juvies, which are the slang for the juvenile, those people on the police force who are, whose job it is to find unwinds. It's a special branch. I mean, and of course, this is in reference to slavery, because you had people going out and for like bounty hunters to return escaped slaves. Well, juvies, but the teens who are slated for unwinding are no longer basically human in the eyes of the society. They become wards of the state, and as such, their identity has to do with their unwinding, and so they lose all kinds of, the idea of the individual and things like that become a piece of machinery, if you will. And as a general rule, the juvies, it's not even as a general rule, the juvies don't use live ammunition to bring down escaped unwinds. In fact, they use a trank gun. And one of the reasons is that it's really kind of against the law to shoot an unwind, escaped unwind, because you're ruining the product. And the trank gun is better because it just puts him to sleep. And in fact, Connor uses, when he becomes the Akron AWOL is another name for Connor Lassiter, and he used the tranquilizer bullet on a juvie cop. And their job is to run around and capture these people. It's, again, all part of the system. Now, of course, the religious one was with tithing. You give a 10% of what you make to the church. It's not a set amount, but, you reserve that. And so a tithe is, again, a child who's designated from birth for unwinding. So Lev is the 10th of 10 children, and so it just made sense that he would be born and his whole life would be dedicated to becoming unwound, because he believes that that's his role in life. And Pastor Dan, supports that, with a religious kind of thing, and using the Bible and all the verses to explain the reality of it. And they all wear white, and they give a separate place at the harvest camp because these kids want to be unwound. This is their goal in life. It's because they see it the way they've been taught to see it. Now, Rachel Ward, there are lots of reasons for unwinding, and they're not always positive. Rachel Ward plays piano, and she's pretty good. Risa, excuse me, not Rachel. Risa Ward, she discovers that she'll be unbound in part because of budget cuts. So they have to trim so they can bring more people in, and she's not that great on the piano, but the big reason is budget cuts, and so she's expendable, and so all the state places and all the kids who are at the state homes all have the last name Ward. That's why it's Risa Ward. So you tell the name, everybody knows where you grew up. Now, Connor escapes. Because of escape, there's a commotion with the car because he grabs Lev as a hostage, and the bus crashes, the driver is killed, and Risa escapes. Now, to get away from Connor, Lev, really takes a hunk out of his arm, and it's very, very painful, and Connor lets go of him, and then he and Risa flee to the woods, and Pastor Dan, who had always counseled him being Lev, he actually tells Lev to run away and not get back in the car. And this comes later when Lev figures it out as a great shock. And in the end of the story, he'll be talking to Pastor Dan, and Pastor Dan said that, well, he's left the church. He can't support. I mean, he loves God, but he can't support tithing as a kind of an arm of the church. So this is when the world turns upside down for Lev in particular, because everything he believed, he's not unlike Todd in this, he finds out is false, and he goes on a kind of a odyssey, and hooks up with people, and learns quickly about how to get along in the world. Now, Soho kids, STA-Ho, Stay-Ho kids, those are the Risa wards. These homeless children, such as Risa Ward, and they're raised in state homes. By the way, again, on the stalking, if you get caught putting the baby on the porch, you're legally bound to raise that kid, so you have a chance. But then again, the system doesn't work as well as it's supposed to, with people refusing to take the children. There's no, I would imagine that the mother could send the kid to a state home too. There's all kinds of things, but the child has to be cared for because it's a commodity. Well, Risa and Connor and Lev, they don't trust him all that much, and they shouldn't. They hide in a bathroom at the high school, and with the stork baby that Connor had rescued, and then so Lev actually turns Risa and Connor in because he wants to be unwound, and he's going to turn them in. But when he calls home and finds out there's a reason that the name isn't not in the papers, because the father is very powerful, and no one's going to really bother with Lev, and so they hide the whole story. There's a lot of discussion amongst them, because the idea was, well, maybe the father is so powerful enough he's going to kill Risa and Connor, but the idea is they don't want him back, and this upsets Lev a lot, and remember that's when he does the fire alarm, and to try to make up for the fact that the police have come for Connor and Risa, and they manage to escape because of the school teacher Hannah, and the fact that someone starts clapping hands, and this is where you get into the thing about the clappers, who in fact have a certain compound that resembles another compound into their bodies, and they can have detonators on their hands, and if they clap, as Mia and I can't remember the name, Blaine, I think, do towards the end of the book, when they blow up the harvest home, they become walking bombs, another form of terrorism, just a more high-tech, we find in Afghanistan and other places, of someone who becomes a walking bomb, and is willing to sacrifice their life for a kind of cause, whatever that cause may be. And of course, Lev will get caught up in that because he's so full of hatred. And so is Mia, because the boy that she thought she really loved, when she met at one of the safe houses, is one of the ones who was, in fact, suffocated in the box that the Goldens, or whatever, will be killed in later on. And so they go and join the clappers, and Lev is very, very famous because he now is the clapper who didn't clap, and he rescues both Risa and Connor from the building later on. Roland, important on his wrists, Roland, who is kind of the bad boy, but in the end he can't kill Connor, even though he thought he wanted to. He's a bully, a little charismatic, but he's still a bully, and he has on his wrist the tattoo of a tiger shark. And of course, by the end of the story, at one point he tries to rape Risa, but at the end, in fact, Connor has on his arm that he lost, replaced by Roland's arm, because he'll have that tiger shark tattoo. And I love, of course, this guy is pretty good about the extent to which he creates this kind of world, because you have Humphrey Dunphy. Humphrey Dunphy refers to, it's Humpty Dumpty, and all the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty back together again. It underscores the fact that once you get unwound, you cannot get put together and must live only in a divided state. And of course, this is what the admiral's doing. It starts with Embry, who turns out has the lung of his own son, Harlan, and his last name is, I believe, is Dunford too. And by the end of the story, on what would have been the 26th birthday of this kid, who the husband and wife had unwound, and that broke up their marriage. But in the end, they get back, and because he is able to get into the data thing and find out where all the parts of his son, well, he's able to gather them all together, um, and and sort of bring them all together. So they could put them all together, and they remember things just the way that Cyrus Finch, with whom Lev travels and learns a great deal. Cyrus Finch is a black man, they call him Umbers, who goes by the name of Sci-Fi. And Sci-Fi has a guy named Tyler's part of his brain, and he hears these voices. And he doesn't know, I mean, not just a voice, there's someone in there compelling him to go to Joplin, Missouri, right? And this is part of what's going on, is that when they put a little part of the brain, then you also, that part of the body is living. Tyler doesn't understand a lot of things, but is going to go back and have Tyler's parents will say, we're not going to unwind you, and it settles him down. But there you have this idea that when you get the arm of somebody else, it will twitch the way it did with the other person, and so you do have and become part of the person from whom you get parts, and so it is Sci-Fi is one of the examples, and he comes from a family of two men. Homosexuality is against the law now, but in the end, he will go to Congress and have passed a law knocking it back to 17 years. The 17 years, and that's in the next book, takes it from there, when the prices are really going up because there's really not as many kids, and there's advertising to compel people to unwind their children at special rates and things along those lines. So at any rate, Sci-Fi plays an important minor role in here, especially with respect to Lev. Now, as I said, Roland has to teach. Connor's a hothead, there's no question about it. He gets into fights, he's a mixed-up kid, and he seems to be turning the corner, but once you sign that paper, it's over. Can't put it back together again. But thanks to Risa, he kind of learns to regulate his temper and to use his brain. And so when he finds that Roland is attempting to rape Risa, he doesn't attack him. He makes the sign of saying, well, I'll get out of here and wash your hands so that you guys can be finished and whatnot. And at first, Risa's kind of like, wow, you were going to let him rape me? And so he said, no, I'm doing what you told me. And then she says, well, and then Connor, who was really, she's her real hero. But he doesn't attack him. He doesn't play that game until towards the end they do go at it. And of course, as I mentioned, Roland will get the upper hand and could have killed Connor, but decides not to. And of course, the next day he goes and they're going to unwind him. And again, Connor, the Admiral, takes a special interest in Embry, Emby, E-M-B-Y, and as matters turn out, they call him the mouth breather because he has a certain kind of asthma. Emby has the lung from the Admiral's son, and so he's going to send the boy to the Admiral's wife, because this is part of the plan of getting all the bits and pieces together to undo the myth of the Humphrey Dumphrey. And he even tells the boy, look, try this kind of inhalant because it worked with my son. And he doesn't say whose lung you have. That'll come later on. And so that's the Admiral's plan all along. He will turn and make the kind of a community out of his son to celebrate the 26th birthday. A couple other things to remind you is that the unwinds from the state home, all the ones that are unwound, that are out there, all have the same last name. Risa Ward. We don't know the actual name. And that voice in Cyrus's head comes from the part of the brain of an unwound boy named Tyler, who's kind of lost in Cyrus's head, and is able to find resolution, which has a profound effect upon sci-fi. And I love the name sci-fi because most people in the field, and I know the field quite well, call it SF. They hate or skiffy. They don't like that. Don't ask me why. But if you're going to go to a science fiction convention, say it's SF. It also means speculative fiction. But I love that his name is sci-fi, which is the genre that you're reading, about possibilities in the future, but also pointing to concerns in the present. Now, I love the graveyard. I mean, one of the reasons I love it is because there are a couple things going on. The admiral's using the place because he feels guilty after what he did to his son, and he felt compelled to do that to his son because he was one of the fathers of the Unwind Bill. I mean, the whole treaty that ended the war. He felt compelled, and people to do what they said, and his son was, like Connor, a little bit of a troublemaker and whatnot, and so he did what he was forced to do. He unwound his son and feels tremendous guilt for it. And so he's running the graveyard. He's a retired admiral from the military, and he's providing a haven for the unwounds that the community knows about. And because the admiral keeps them off the street, don't, what is it? Don't tell. The whole possible of thing is remain silent and everybody will be happy. Don't ask, don't tell, or don't. I can't remember it for today. It's probably the painkiller. But there it is again, is that they're willing to turn their back on it because it makes it less of a problem for them of having to run around getting the unwinds and all that stuff. If they're out in that graveyard area, fine. And then, of course, he makes money. Part of it he makes is by, that the kids can work at a place till they're 17. The admiral gets money for that. And about once a month, he flies in. He buys a decommissioned aircraft, and basically, sometimes he'll sell it another one. If it's a DC-10 or something that's still working, somebody in the Congo wants it, they'll get money from that. So it's a working place, but he also sells parts of all kinds of, keeping these old aircraft going. And he has a rather lucrative business. It's mostly done on the internet, but it's just like a chop shop. In this particular case, it's parts. He gets a really good old airplane, and he sells the parts. And what he's stopping it is from the same thing happening to the children who are there, to stop them from being taken apart or unwound. So he's a good man, but he has a moral imperative behind what he does to a personal imperative. That is just because he feels he has to make up for what he did for his own son. But each time, every month or so, one of those planes comes in, and they have a secret and valuable cargo, and these are the unwinds who escaped. And of course, there are people out there. Hannah took her to Sophie's, was it? Who hid the boys, and they're sent everybody. And there's a kind of a underground out there, like the Underground Railroad, another of this kind of slavery metaphor, where the people, like unwinds, are wards of the state, and they are property, like slaves. And so you have well, it looks like I got shut off there, and I was talking about the metaphors with slavery on the people who are organized as an underground to save escaped unwinds. In the next book, they have a name for what the groups are, and they go to the graveyard, and we imagine there might be other places we don't know, but the graveyard has connections with places, so someone could go work. support the graveyard. It's sort of a youth hostel of a kind. And at the graveyard, all the unwinds have job, and Risa works as a medic because of some training that she had at the ward. And as Connor writes, I love it, he writes that Connor notes that she's learning to be an exceptionally good fake doctor, and actually continue at this practice even after the game is over. Now, the game after the novel is over. Lev eventually will catch up. We don't know what's happened to him since he left sci-fi, but there is a novelette that's out there that I haven't read yet that covers this story. And I like it when Lev arrives. Connor rushes right up, hauls off and punches Lev in the eye before he hugs him and says how happy he is to see Lev. And this is the length of learning that has gone on for Connor, who realizes now he can empathize with other people, something he lacked before, and part of and Risa is certainly part of the reason when you see too that as Todd does in The Knife of Never Letting Go, and Ben says, look, we all make mistakes, so what you have to do is forgive and move on, because when he killed that the spackle, remember, Todd felt like he was a murderer. I'm a killer, I'm horrible, and Ben says with the regular kind of thing we've heard in a lot of the others, you didn't know any better. You acted on your experience, and until you have other experiences to offer a changed perspective, you behave in a very, should we say, habitual manner. And this is when Lev joins, Lev and Blaine and Mai, M-A-I, at work call in the graveyard. Lev and Mai, and I think Blaine is the other one. And they join a small group who are going to go work on a pipeline in Alaska, which shocks the hell out of Risa. But of course, in the end, we know with Cleaver and the other ones that this is the Clappers are also using the graveyard to recruit people into their area, just the way that, let's say, Al-Qaeda or other people would, how they would recruit people from other places to teach them how to fight or how to blow themselves up. So part of the pipeline here, which of course the Admiral would know nothing about, is to get people to join the Clappers from these places that have all kinds of desperate and angry young children over that they see as something very unfair. And if you have someone like Lev, he's predisposed to blow himself up because he was ready to give up his life anyway, and Mai has her own reasons. So, they remain true to form, if you will. There's ironies at the end, of course. Connor gets the eye, I believe, and the arm of Roland. But before that time, there is a riot, and this is, Roland's been thinks he wants to take over, and Cleaver's been involved in all these different kinds of things, and he's happy to die and all this stuff. But at the riot in the graveyard, Roland, whom Connor, based on the evidence, has accused of murdering the Golden Ones, and I'll have to go back and check to see that I've covered that area. The 5 golden children are the Goldies, I think, are the 5 who are the close associates of the Admiral and who basically run the place. Amp and Jeeves is a famous butler in P.D. Woodhouse comedies. They're actually killed by suffocation, and Cleveland and the others, Mai even, but not Lev, are involved with that. And Connor thinks that Roland has done it, so he's rocked Roland into one of those crates and put bullet holes into he can breathe, but Connor was wrong. And so he and Risa stop, Connor and Risa helps stop the riot, and they get the admiral he's very ill, and they get Roland to fly them to the town, and the admiral, they want to give him a new heart, but he refuses to have a transplant, which really drives them crazy, saying, oh my God, we got to work now. And in the end, he says he has 25% of his heart is working. He can't go back to the graveyard anymore. Connor and Hayden and Risa and Lev will take over at the end. But there you go. He won't have a heart attack. And Risa herself, at the end, the blast at the Happy Jack harvest camp severs her spinal column. Lev rescues her, and he also stops the blood on Connor's arm, and Connor says, "Did you bite me again?" I love that line. This is an interesting one. They don't, they have plenty of doctors, so Risa's medical profession won't save her. They don't have infants, but she plays piano, and so she plays keyboard in a band that performs on the roof of the chop shop while the kids walk down the red carpet and enter the building. And this just reminds me of a book that I was just reading about Auschwitz, and there's a movie based upon it, of the Jewish piano player who was kept alive because he played brilliantly. And so Risa and those who are in the band, if they play and they do a good job, you see, they will not be unwound to the last time. And this reminds me, of the Nazis killing the Jews, but of course they take their hair, they take their gold, they take everything that they can take of value, including fillings and whatnot, and they play happy music. And so, and right, what is the word? Work. I'm trying to think of what is over Auschwitz, the saying that our work brings freedom, and it would say release. And so she plays in a band, and this will keep her alive until, of course, the clappers, Blaine and Maya, blow themselves up and destroy this place. And it looks like, with Connor running out of the building, that he's, makes him even more of a legend because he's the only one who's ever survived walking into that building. Now, Roland gets quickly sent to be unwound. The average stay is, I think, 3 weeks, and he's like a few days. And then, he probably thinks because he got in fights, or he thinks the one with Connor snitched on him. But as it turns out, he's going to be sent quickly to be unwound because he has AB negative blood, which is very rare and in very high demand, making him, as they say, you should be really happy. You're worth more than any other kid in this unit. And in his unit, and this is where the author does something that I was reading about. You could really make a mistake in this. What happens when they get one run? None of the kids know. We do, because Susan goes through and tells us what happens to Roland when he is unwound, till he's not Roland anymore. And a lot of people would say, well, just leave that alone. You don't have to know. It's part of the suspense, and well, that's not the way it works. He does a really great job, I think, of taking us through the process. And one of the other things to come out of the attack, Connor gets away because he has a new name. One of the guards that was killed hated his job anyway. They help Connor to adopt that name, and so he won't be unwound. And on the other hand, Risa suffers a severed spine, but she refuses to have a replacement spine, and not so much that she's against, which she probably is anyway, but that's not the prime motivation. If she gets a new spine, as soon as she's healed up, she'll still be, Lisa Ward will still be unwound. And they have her there, so they can't very well let her go. But it's against the law to unwind, like people who are paralyzed and have other kinds of, injuries and things along those lines. They're they're let live, because you don't want to send in, you know, unsatisfactory products. You're allowed to live, but so she will remain in a wheelchair, and maybe until she's 18, and then or 17 now, because thanks to sci-fi, the rule had been changed. I wanted to see if there's something that I missed that I wanted to. Yeah, I wanted to make sure the Goldens is what they're referred to, and that's the Admiral's 5 most trusted kids, and they're in charge, and they're the ones that Cleaver and the others put to death to try to get back at the Admiral to shake things up at the camp. So I think I've covered everything for the quiz, and then some. I'm sorry for the break in the quiz there. I hit the wrong button, and I hope everything got in there. But you'll do fine. You'll do fine. So do a good job on this one. We have one more book to read, and I'll have a surprise quiz for you next week. Like you'll take it as soon as you can, because next week's quiz is a freebie for you for all your hard work. That's it.